This house is for the ingathering of nature and human nature. It is a house of friendship, a haven in trouble, an open room for the encouragement of our struggle. It is a house of freedom, guarding the dignity and worth of every person. It offers a platform for the free voice, for declaring both in times of security and danger, the full and undivided conflict of opinion. It is a house of truth-seeking, where scientists can encourage devotion to their quests, where mystics can abide in a community of searchers. It is a house of art, adorning its celebrations with melody and handiworks. It is a house of prophecy, outrunning times past and times present in visions of growth and progress. This house is a cradle for our dreams, the workshop of our common endeavor. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is so good to have you all here. I'm Reverend Hank Purse. I am your interim minister. For those of you who don't know, it is so good to have you all here on this snowy day as we think of our colleagues further south who canceled church this morning and who I'll send very images of very stern-looking Protestant, Puritan ministers going tisk, tisk, tisk to all of their Facebook pages this morning. It is good that you are here. I have a couple of things I just wanted to say. First, you will see in your order of worship that there is information about the caring committee. The caring committee does amazing stuff here at this congregation. Most of it is sort of behind the scenes, but they are out there and doing really wonderful stuff. So there's information about the caring committee on this side, and on the back side, the reverse, there is a form where you can volunteer to help out, and there's a number of different things, and we are asking you to fill them out. And then there is a silver box attached to the wall in the hallway, right outside the church office. And if you want to just fill them out and then drop them in there, that would be the best place for us to gather them. And there's all kinds of information there. The other thing I want to remind folks that the All Church Council is happening today, and we also have someone really important here. When she was here 2 weeks ago, you didn't think she was all that important. But now, I hope you understand just how important she is, because we have our own Sue Phillips here. And Sue Phillips has been announced as one of the 2 candidates to become the next president of the Unitarian Universalist. Sue is here because this is her church. She's not campaigning, but if you want to ask her how you can volunteer or give her money, that you can speak to her afterwards. But Sue, really is an honor to have you here and to be like, we knew her when. And with that, let me turn the rest of our service over to our worship associate. The next part of our worship service over to.
Good morning. My name is Susan Batson, and I am a member of the worship committee. First Parish is a vibrant, welcoming congregation that welcomes all people to grow deep faith and take bold action. And we are so glad that you're here with us today. This sanctuary is made holy by your presence. If you're here with us for the first time, there are welcome packs in the pews, the pew wraps right in front of you, and that has information about our services, our child care, and our RE. If you fill out a yellow card in the pack and put it in the offering plate, we'll send you our weekly email so you can get to know us better. The greeter today is Chris Pitt, right there in the back corner. So, if you are new and you would like someone to walk over with you to social hour after church or just ask some questions, see Chris. If you're here with children, we welcome all children in our congregation. If you'd like to take your children to the nursery, we have certified babysitters there as well. We strive to make our worship experience accessible to people of all ages and abilities. So if you need a hearing, something to help you hear, or large print, the ushers have those in the back. The work of our living faith is done both in and out of church, so I draw your attention to the purple insert that contains all our church announcements. And I suggest you read them carefully because there's lots of good stuff in there. We have two announcements today. Tucker Smith would like to talk about the stewardship dinner or evening.
That by this time next week you will have cabin fever and you will be delighted to have a night out. And I so welcome you and encourage you to come to Camp Run Amok. Be over there in the old mess hall. And Camp Run Amok is First Parish's stewardship party. Next Saturday, 7 o'clock, there will be yummy food, over 21 bug juice, fire pit, dancing, a tattoo booth with wildlife critters, a quiet coloring corner with coloring books, what to pack for camp, your completed pledge form, your favorite recreational beverage to share, a folding camp or spectator chairs, if you have any. Dress, attire is campy, or as someone in the choir this morning said, vampy. And I said, well, I don't know, campy, vampy. It's optional, but it'll be fun. This is a party with a purpose, and it'll be more fun if you come. Thank you.
Chris Pitt, our head of our First Parish Committee, would also like to speak.
So I'm wearing a number of different hats this morning. Singing choir, I'm the chair of the parish committee, I'm the greeter today, but I am also the auctioneer. Not to be outdone with some more fun people with their props. I have a prop. 2 weeks from now, February 7th, the week before Valentine's Day, the annual chocolate auction will take place in the parish hall right after church. Be here. Thank you.
Lastly, I want to tell you something. You belong here. You belong here maybe just for the next hour, though we hope for longer. You belong here, and we are so happy to have you with us. Extending a generous welcome is a spiritual practice, and I invite us all to extend that welcome to our neighbors.
I had to go say hi to the baby. The rest of you are cute, but you're not that cute. Harper, will you please remain standing? Oh, you all sat down. Please stand up. Please rise if you are able and join in singing our first hymn. It's number 360 in our hymnal, Here We Have Gathered, 360.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Ann Principe, your religious educator for the next, I guess it's 5 months. It used to be 6 months. And I'm a community artist and minister, and I'm really dedicated to the spiritual lives of children, teens, and all ages. So it's really great to be here with you and hopefully be of purpose in a short period of time. And one of the ways I try to do that in a hurry so that the kids can like me sooner is to use our sense of silliness to understand sometimes complicated things. And so here's the serious opening to this Time for All Ages. Unitarian Universalism as a religion is unique. Each person who worships here in our congregations and fellowships all over our continent and in the world, they come with a strong desire and on their own meaningful path for truth and meaning. And we say we do this freely and responsibly. The freedom is life-giving, and this responsibility is quite an honor. So what do we exactly mean when we say responsibly search for truth and meaning? We affirm to covenant and promote each other's search for truth and meaning, freedom, responsibility. We embrace diversity. It's holy to us. And yet we've gotten a glimpse from Reverend Hank, and what's going to come later is that, but what about when we disagree or have different ideas, different opinions, and we offer criticism to each other? It's kind of tricky. It can be tricky. And so I offer a brief game for all ages, but particularly the children, because I'll ask questions that are of particular importance to you. So if I ask something like, who loves ice cream? You might, it's not going to take you long to answer. Yeah, okay. Great. And if you love ice cream, you will raise your hand. But then I might be asking another question, like, because it is all ages, who likes spinach? Wait. Okay. Here's the way this game goes. I'm going to ask a question. If your answer is, yeah, I like it, I love it, let's do it this way. And please, this is a training session. If you love ice cream, please say like this, love it. Ready? Who loves ice cream?
Love it.
Excellent. Okay. Who loves pizza?
Love it.
Okay, I need a little more like, I think we call this emo, expressive. Okay, so that's very good. Now we're going to go to the next level, 1 or 2 levels. If you don't love ice cream, and if you don't love what I call out, you might feel, because we're Unitarian Universalists, we'd be free to say, I'm not going to say it, it's the H word. You know what I'm talking about?
Hank?
Hank, 4-letter word. And so I'll just say straight out, if you don't love what I call out, you can go like this. Ready? Here's a training session. Not so much for me. Can we try that?
Not so much for me.
Okay, we good with that? Okay. Who loves snow?
Not so much for me.
Diversity. Who loves football?
Love it.
Who loves spinach?
Love it.
It's so excellent. We didn't see any. Right? And so think about this. When we're talking with each other and we're in conversation and ideas come up and issues come up, we hear someone express themselves passionately with love, is important to them with their heart and conscience, direct them to believe. And sometimes a little too quickly when we might get in there like, oh, no, oh, hey, it's terrible. And we might use worse words than that. And so we remember to slow down and listen to each other. And we practice here in our faith community, listening, allowing for the love and passion, but also being able to express ourselves in a respectful way that doesn't, what we say in the youth community, harsh someone's mellow. And so a couple more, let's see. Who loves coffee?
Need it.
Need it. And who loves music?
Love it.
Wonderful. And can we hear a song that we love that is so familiar to our children as we are sung out to our classes?
So I grew up in a town called McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, which is an industrial town just south of Pittsburgh along the Ohio River. And the apocryphal story about the Rocks is that it had the highest combined number of bars and churches per capita of any place in the United States. Now, I've never actually been able to confirm that that was true, but the fact that somebody would make up that story actually tells you pretty much what you needed to know about the place, which was that it was a hard-working, hard-drinking kind of town, and it was a place where faith was at the center of community life, specifically the Catholic faith. It's a never-ending source of amazement to me that I'm standing here with you now in a place that my younger self could scarcely have imagined existed. Now, my younger self, to be honest, could scarcely have imagined that Protestants existed. We had a couple of Protestant kids in my Catholic school, and they were kind of like strange alien beings. You know, like, what's your deal? It's too bad you're going to hell. But when I compare the faith community that I grew up in with the one I'm in now, issues of dogma and ritual, obviously come to the fore. But beyond that, the thing that stands out the most is power. You see, the faith community that I grew up in doesn't exist anymore. The diocese closed the church down a couple of decades ago. The church, the Catholic school that I went to, no longer exists. That was shut down. Many of the things that once gave people meaning in the town where I grew up don't exist anymore. And that's what happens when the mills pull up stakes and when the population of your town falls in half in a couple of decades. In towns like the Rocks, growing up, and there's a lot of them, the most important decisions that people made about how you lived your life of faith and the work of your community and how you lived your life tended to be made by people who never asked your opinion, and they wouldn't have cared what it was if they did. If the factory wanted to lay you off, if the diocese wanted to shut down your church, if they decided to send an abusive priest to serve it, which actually happened in my parish well after I had left, you didn't have any say in the matter. Needless to say, that is not a problem with us. Unitarian Universalists ask your opinion about things all the time, like almost to a fault sometimes, right? And in our democratically run free faith, nobody tells you what to think or what to believe, and no one can tell us that we can't worship in this church for as long as the earth continues to spin. That's up to us. And in this community, we have power that goes beyond that procedural power. We actually have real power. We have a level of material wealth that exceeds that of most of this country and most of the world. We have Our congregational survey tells us that the average level of educational attainment in our congregation is a master's degree. When we call a community meeting and invite our public officials to come, they come and they actually listen. And we have connections. We know people in the world. With that power, I think, comes a responsibility. Keeping this church standing, keeping it warm, keeping it lit, keeping it available for our community, keeping it staffed with great people and with a great minister is incredibly important and is a big part of that responsibility. But if that's our standard, I'd submit that we're actually aiming too low. We have, as people who steward great resources, a responsibility to do as much as we can with them. To use our latent power to grow our faith, to widen our circle of community and care, and to help those with less power to challenge injustice and serve the greater good. I'm here helping to run the stewardship drive, and along with my family, investing a share of our income in this church every year, not just because I like you all, and I do, and not just because being here at First Parish gives me peace and comfort, but because I believe that this church is a vehicle to building a better world. If we're serious about our faith, I think we need to aspire to be like the Mennonites that we ran into when we were doing relief work with this church down in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina, who told us that the gospel isn't worth anything if there's not some shoe leather in it. Stewardship is one of the times in our church year when we're offered the holy opportunity to put our shoe leather behind our version of the good news. We have all the power that we need in this building to build the church of our dreams. And I hope that this time and this season and this year that we will make that happen.
The reading today, the vision for the Charles Street Meeting House, written by Ken Patton. Our meeting house has one basic and simple idea: to find a religious setting for a religion of one humanity and one world. Our unofficial motto is, I am human, and nothing that is human can be alien to me. We are a completely free-minded fellowship with no creed or confession of faith. We look for insight and wisdom to all of humanity, for truth and goodness have never been a monopoly of any one people or religion. For this reason, we do not call ourselves Christian or Jewish or Buddhist, although these traditions are greatly cherished along with the others. We include all and exclude none. This does not mean that we are uncritical, quite the opposite. The criteria of evidence, reasonableness, and consistency are applied to all. The scientific method and attitude with the findings of the various branches of science are allied to the arts, to philosophy, and to naturalistic mysticism, to give us a religious approach that is at once hard-headed, tough-minded, appreciative, and warm-hearted. Belief is allied with doubt, affirmation, and criticism. We reject all creeds and dogmas on principle, for only the open mind is free to probe and discover. But we accept the other person's faith as part of the human scene and appreciate it without accepting it as adequate for our own use. To criticize is not to reject. This point must be emphasized, for it is the dividing line between the free mind and fanaticism. It is the doorway to a universal religion that rigorously seeks the truth and yet is also inclusive and welcoming to all.
For
By the late 1940s, the Universalist Church in America had a problem. You see, they had their headquarters over on Beacon Street, but they had no churches in the city of Boston. So they entered into a bold experiment. They bought the old Charles Street Meeting House there at the foot of Beacon Hill, and they hired a minister, Kenneth Patton, and charged him to not only make a new church, but in many ways to make a new universalism. And in his time there, he redefined what the word universalism meant by bringing the arts of all religions and cultures into a religion for one world. It was the first real experiment in our faith of a small u universalism, right? Where before universalism was about universal salvation, this was about the universe. Patton got to work very quickly. He went to that meeting house, which had pews much like these, and he pulled them up. And on the image, and then on the center of the floor, they placed an image of the earth, and then repositioned the pews in a circle around that earth, so the parishioners would know when they sat there, they could see one another, and they would know that they were representatives of the whole human race. And then in the apse, that's this area right here. In the apse, he had an artist paint a picture of the Andromeda Galaxy. And on the other side of the sanctuary was a mobile of an atom. So the parishioners would know their place in the cosmos between the atom and the stars. They removed the pulpit, and in its place was a bookshelf filled with the world's scriptures, and poetry, and philosophy, and science. And adorning the walls were art, reflecting humanity's yearning, and all around the meeting house were 65 beautiful brass symbols of the world's religions. Patton wrote hymns and poems, created liturgies. This was in 1949. That's like the Mad Men era, right? Right? That's when people are smoking cigarettes, drinking martinis, and here he was creating a church that still seems kind of crazy and radical now. And what he really created was a new way of Unitarian Universalism to be a church. A way that still affects the way we as a religion think of ourselves. Ours is a faith that has always asked, what kind of church do we want to be? The problem is that we don't often stick around long enough to answer it. We are a church that embraces evolution, not just scientifically, but theologically as well. Just think, from 200 years ago, when the Unitarians, the more liberals, and the more conservatives split, a generation after that came the Transcendentalists, who told folks to go out into the world and find God firsthand, out there in nature. At the same time, you have the Universalists, who are embracing a radical, heretical idea that God saves all people from hell. And this faith continued to grow and to transform. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, our religions embraced the optimism of our nation. The Reverend James Freeman Clark wrote the 5 points of the theology of the future. He said that as Unitarians believed in, excuse this language, it's from 1880, but excuse this language, but he said, Unitarians believed in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. People would make fun of this for years by saying what Unitarians really believed in was the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the neighborhood of Boston. But this onward and upward optimism was part of our faith, part of our DNA. It was part of the DNA of our nation till the First World War came, with the magnitude of death and destruction that upward and onward theology seemed ill-suited to explain what happened. When much of mainstream Protestantism returned to what was called the neo-orthodoxy, which is sort of a reevaluation of the teaching of the Reformation, we liberals did not. We liberals sort of doubled down on this whole onward and upward, this idea of the progress of theology. They started to embrace the theological ideas of humanism, which refers to sort of a non-theistic belief centered on human agency, looking to science rather than supernatural revelation to understand the world. So, knowing this, the fact that Ken Patton came along in the late 1940s and created this whole new church, it sort of made sense. But there were critics both inside our denomination and outside of it as well that complained. Patton tried to answer his critics with his statements that we heard Susan read this morning. To criticize is not to reject. This point must be emphasized, for it is the dividing line between the free mind and fanaticism. It is a doorway to a universal religion that rigorously seeks the truth, yet is also inclusive and welcoming to all. It sounds really good. But what so often happened in our faith is that we got this new idea, and yet there's also these elements of humanism going on, and also sort of the same sort of liberal Protestantism that was also going on at the time, and people came to our churches and they said, I want one of each of those flavors, please. And our churches have tried to morph and figure out how we are to be a religion that balances all of these different beliefs, all of these different ways of being. But it's hard to do so, and we often aren't very critical about it. We can embrace so many things, but can we really examine them rationally? Can we apply the same reason that our ancestors did to Christianity? Can we apply the same reason to other faiths? Can we be critical of them as outsiders without sounding like colonists or bigots or appropriators or just spiritual tourists? Or maybe we should just shut up and sort of double down on the universal religion, become like the Baha'is, and just focus on the religions of the world. It's hard to think about how our faith should evolve. It's one of the things that when I started to think about this as a teenager, thinking about how else we could be, it's really hard. You know, when you preach about the universe and about all of the world's religions, changing that message seems like you're going backwards, unless we start worshiping space aliens or something. We're constantly trying to answer the question, what kind of religion do we want to be? It's hard for adults. It's even more difficult as children to try to understand what our faith believes and try to explain that to your friends. Patton said he would be critical. Our faith said it would be critical, but it hasn't really been. So allow me for a few moments to apply, to run our theologies, our belief systems through a couple of filters. First, theologically, and then culturally. The idea of this universalized universalism. The first thing we need to acknowledge is that we've embraced these ideas since really before the 1940s. I mean, William Blake wrote about it in the 18th century, and others have written about it ever since, the thought of that there must be some unity in all of these religions. There must be a way for us to have a systematic theology of world religions. But Stephen Prothero, who's a professor at BU, wrote a book called God is Not One. He writes, the popular metaphor for this view portrays the great religions as different paths up the same mountain. It's possible to climb the mountain from any side, but when the top is reached, the trails converge. The base and foothills of theology, ritual, and organizational structures, religions are distinct. Differences are cultural. But beyond these differences, the same goal beckons. Prothero writes, this is a comforting notion in a world in which religious violence often seems more present and potent than God, but is it really true? He points out that it is simplistic and ultimately damaging to think that all religions are the same. He writes, no one argues that economic systems or political regimes are one and the same. Capitalism and socialism are different, and same goes for democracy and monarchy. Yet scholars continue to claim that religious rivals such as Hinduism and Islam and Judaism are, by some miracle of the imagination, both essentially the same and basically good. His main point is that religions aren't similar because each religion addresses a different problem and therefore has a different solution. And the other problem with this sort of universalized religion that I'm sure many of you have felt is the issue of breadth and not enough depth. Just logically, it's difficult to touch on the many world faiths and do it respectfully. Years ago, I lost a very good church member to the local United Church of Christ, and she said, I'm sorry, I just need a more specific God. I understood. It's also really easy just to preach the good stuff from all these different books of scriptures to preach on poetry and art. But when you have one scripture, you gotta wrestle with that. You have to live with all the discrepancies of that. I realized this when I was the last church I served, which was both Unitarian, Universalist, and United Church of Christ. I realized in my preaching that I was sort of using scripture the same way that I used the readings that I chose. That is, I was using them as seasonings for my sermon. I was choosing readings that would make my sermon seem really smart. But it wasn't necessarily the truth of what the scripture said. Let me give you an example. Today, if you were in a Christian church that followed the liturgical calendar, you read a passage from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus goes to Galilee, and then he goes to the local synagogue, and he stands up and he reads a section from the prophet Isaiah. It said, the Spirit of the Lord has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and to recover the sight of the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year of acceptability to the Lord. If you're sitting in a Christian church today, and you hear this, you have to think, did Jesus really just say, open up the doors to all the prisons? Let them all out? That he was here to free everyone from prison? Mark Twain once said that the parts of the Bible I don't understand do not bother me. I'm bothered by the parts I do understand. Wrestling with Scripture, wrestling with a book that everyone in the congregation is familiar with and has a sense of ownership to, has a different feel. I was talking to Tim this morning. We were talking about this very thing, and I said, you know what it is? It's the analogy that for me that I'm going to use to you, because perhaps we don't have that same similar scripture that we all feel like we have ownership in. This day, last year, was the day when the whole Deflategate thing came out, right? And I know that we're all patriots, right? So I don't care what your answers were when Anne asked you. Right? All of a sudden, we had the sense of what? Not our Tom Brady. No. We have a sense of ownership of Tom Brady and the Patriots. That couldn't be going wrong, right? We've had to struggle with maybe they cheated. Well, what does that mean, right? How does that reflect on us? Our desire as Unitarian Universalists to be so open often ends up limiting us, or we end up being afraid to offend someone with a different belief. I realized really my first week in Westford when I was preaching at that church that I was able to talk about God, which I felt that all of a sudden I could talk about this much about theology, where previously in my last church I felt like I only preached about this much. Now I know really a lot of that was me and not necessarily the congregation, but all of a sudden there was a sense of freedom because there was more confinement in it. There is a rarely articulated fear of giving offense. The Reverend Rebecca Parker once said that there is a culture of niceness in Unitarian Universalism. We often give lip service to the ways in which theological diversity enriches our congregations, and there is no question that it could. However, all the evidence suggests that, in fact, growing theological diversity within our culture, where tolerance and acceptance are considered paramount values, more commonly make individuals so afraid of offending one another that conversations about belief and theology are stifled. Now, as much as this is about our theology, some of it is also about our culture. And what that culture is it's a WASB culture, right? It's that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. Even when you and I may not be white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, that is the culture of our faith. It's a system that our churches have sort of followed, right? So what does that mean? One, fairness, we believe in democracy, and there's a general emotional sobriety, perhaps. We tend to be intellectual and introverted. And one of the reasons why this culture has remained is because since we're not united in a belief, the things that unite us are things like educational level, or economic level, or race, or class. And something, and lastly, there's something about our fear of conflict that has made being critical very different. Now maybe it's theological, maybe it's that sort of the culture, the theology of niceness. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's generational. I don't know, but my mom joined the All Souls non-subscribing Presbyterian Church in Belfast. That's such a mouthful. But who are the sister denomination to the Unitarian Universalist Association there in Northern Ireland. And she joined it in part because the minister there, Reverend Dr. M.U., my mom said that she remembers him on that first Sunday saying to people, there was some announcements and there was some talk back during the announcements. And he stood up and he said, if you like a good fight, join this church. But we don't even know how to argue. What Anne instructed us this morning? Not so much for me. We haven't given ourselves a chance to be able to say that. To either say, I love that, or to say, not so much for me. I'm not sure how we became so conflict averse. Because we wanted to be accepting, or our lack of critical thinking about beliefs caused us to avoid conflict. But we learn to talk to each other about who we are and what it is we believe. This past year at the General Assembly, Reverend Marlon Lavinar gave a sermon during the service of living tradition, which is the big sermon. He wrote, I realize that if coming to my congregation means pretending that you don't have any beliefs or longings that fit outside of a narrow, mostly white, middle-class, progressive norm, then most people probably don't want to attend my church, because that's not That's not a church as much as it's a spiritual and emotional closet. We need to have a coming out in this association. As our culture has been learning, coming out is not just for the LGBTQ community anymore. We need a coming out in our association for those of us who are poor, or immigrants, military veterans, Christians, theists, Republicans, and more. The problem is that despite all our inclusiveness in many ways, we still have a fairly spiritually and emotionally closeted culture. And it's not just about not being welcoming to certain others and to certain outsiders. It can be pretty lonely and sometimes pretty painful even for insiders. So we need to learn, we need to have tools to learn to be able to talk with each other, to be able to talk about our beliefs. We need to be able to talk about our fears and our weaknesses, our lives, about the places where we struggle, the places where we have conflict. We need to not only think about what kind of church do we want to have, but what kind of church does God want us to be? Or God's? What kind of church does God want us to be? A couple of years ago, I saw Nadia Bowles-Weber, who is a Lutheran minister, spoke, and she spoke about the idea of a new church, which blends different aspects of Christianity together in a new way. And she points out that in this era, people who are coming to church aren't so interested in applying reason to all situations and stories. People today want to have influence in their environment, and the church needs to figure out how we marry traditions and experiences. People are not asking, is it true? But does it work? Now, the experiment at the Charles Street Meeting House lasted only 15 years. Yet it was a success. It has influenced more of our faith than really anything else in the 20th century. We need a desire to find a unified faith of the world that helps us to be the people that God needs us to be, that we need to be. And it is my hope that we will continue to evolve into such a faith that embraces all the world and yet is a place there for us to struggle and to be honest and authentic about who we are and how we are in this world. Amen. Let's open our hearts in prayer. So God, grant us the capacity to see deeply, to see your light in the people around us, to see your truth behind the fog of messages that dehumanize your people. Grant us the ability to be good friends to each other. Teach us to value and support each other because we can't do your work alone. Teach us to laugh with each other. Help us in pursuing justice, to find joy too. Grant us the wisdom to care for our neighbors. Help us to know that we are connected. Aid us in learning curiosity and generosity and empathy and respect. Grant us the ability to embrace our diversity while discovering how much we share. Grant us the insight to see the seeds of what is possible. Give us courage to nourish our hope even when we fear we will be disappointed. Help us to see you working in the world. On this day, we hold in our thoughts and prayers the life of Carl Allendorf. Think of Grace and her sister and her mother who are here, as well as all his friends. He died this past week. The choir grieves with Grace and her family. Chris and Dottie ask us to grieve also with Krista, who lost her mother this week. Tucker Smith asks for us to remember Gerda Conant, a Milton activist of great love and great passion. Kiki wishes a happy 11th birthday to her niece, Veronica. Help us turn towards you, O God. Help us to open our hearts, to see pain behind anger and harshness. Help us to become vessels of your love, that we may be your partners in creating a world to come. Be with us as we grieve, as we celebrate. This we ask in your holy name. Amen. Let's be together in silence forever. All that our congregation has, all that it is, we bring to it. The very first act of transformation is the giving of oneself. The offering is our opportunity to turn our ideals into actions, and we invite you to give generously. The offering will now be given and received.